Hey guys, Shin Megami Tensei, finally! I have been waiting so long to make this video, the top 10 best Shin Megami Tensei games, in my opinion of course. And in this video I am not going to include Persona games, because number one, well, Persona, I already made a top 10 of the best Persona games, so I'll leave it at the end of this video so you can go and watch it. And the second reason being that Persona was never actually called Shin Megami Tensei Persona. You know, that was just a marketing strategy by Atlus of America when they localized the games here after the third game. So even though they are still spin-offs of Shin Megami Tensei franchise, they're not called Shin Megami Tensei Persona. That's the reason. And I am also only covering, as usual, North American releases, not only in Japan games, like, I don't know, the first two Shin Megami Tensei games. I am well aware that the first one was recently released in English for Android, but I only played for a couple of hours and nah. I know a lot of you love that game, but nah. In any case, remember, this is only my opinion, and as usual, let's begin! Number 10. Demi Kids, Light Version and Dark Version. Originally known as Devil Children, these two are a pair that not many people are familiar with. They were the developers' attempt to make something like Pokemon, with the intention of building a gameplay that focuses on capturing monsters and training them. It started back in the Game Boy Color, with 3 games released only in Japan back in the year 2000. Believe it or not, these Devil Children games are a whole franchise, involving several games for the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance. But the only 2 games of that franchise released in the West have been these two: Devil Children, Light and Dark Version, changed to Demi Kids to avoid a narrow-minded rejection from parents, since these games were obviously aimed for kids. Now, both games are technically the same, gameplay-wise, and even though the story is also the same, you play as different characters in each version. I played both, and I prefer the Dark Version, but I recommend them both anyway. They're pretty fun to play, and well, they do feel like Pokemon clones, but in a good sense. Number 9. Shin Megami Tensei 4. Released in 2013, SMT4 is a turn-based RPG, not a dungeon crawler in first person anymore, like some of the first games of the franchise had been, and like many of them, takes place in a post-apocalyptic world with the constant battle of angels and demons. You take the role of a samurai called Flynn on a quest-driven adventure that also collects demons to fuse them or have them fight by his side. It's got one hell of a story, probably one of the best in the entire franchise in my opinion, still with famous press-turn battle system that consists on taking advantage of exploiting physical or elemental weaknesses. It also has an amazing soundtrack, a pretty interesting cast of characters that's technically split into 3 routes: Law, Chaos and Neutrality, leading the game to many different possible endings. I strongly recommend this title, even if it's mostly driven by quests that can be a little annoying and repetitive at times, but if you enjoy this franchise, this game is definitely a must. Number 8. Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2. I'm putting both games on the same place since they're technically the same game but cut into 2 parts. At least that's how I felt it, since the second one is a very direct sequel of the first one. This title also takes place on a post-apocalyptic future, focusing on a group of people fighting other 6 groups called tribes in what seems to be a digital world. Instead of recruiting demons, your characters actually transform into them to fight their battles against pretty much other demons. The press turn system is still there, but instead you now have a party of 3 main characters and not just one guy with his or her demons. The story, although being also extremely good and well constructed, is very linear, therefore making the game very linear, which can become repetitive at times. Nevertheless, it's still an excellent duology of games that are very unique, very conceptual, and pretty much awesome. Number 7. Strange Journey Redux. It's a port of the Nintendo DS version from back in 2009. Once again, we're in a science fiction environment where a special task force is sent to investigate a spatial distortion in the Antarctica. However, once they arrive, things go wrong, and you are now stuck in this very strange world where you can fight demons and recruit them into your party. As you saw, this game went back to its roots into a first-person dungeon crawler system that's very infamous, as a matter of fact, for having some of the longest, hardest, and most tedious labyrinths in RPG history. That, in my opinion, only adds up to the challenge, making the game more addictive. Now, I played both versions, the 3DS one and the original one for the Nintendo DS, and I'm obviously going to recommend the Redux version since it's an enhanced port with a friendlier gameplay, voice acting, new demons, new routes, endings, and a new character. The story of this game is very good too, mainly with adult characters, and could also be one of the best in the franchise as well. Number 6. Devil Summoner Soul Hackers. This is a sequel to the original Demon Summoner game released for the Sega Saturn in 1995 that was never released outside Japan. Actually, Soul Hackers was originally released for the Saturn as well in 1997, also ported to the PlayStation in 1999. Neither version came out of Japan, and we never met this game until its enhanced port for the Nintendo 3DS in 2013. It's a science fiction RPG where a group of hackers infiltrate an online game to investigate the attack of demons across the city. Pretty much like the previous game, this one also is a dungeon crawler in first person, and the battle systems are very similar, also in first person, with the famous SMT press turn system. In this game, you're not just the dude recruiting demons to fight by his side, but you also have a party member called Nemisa, the other main character. This is a pretty interesting game, with labyrinths not as hard as the ones in Strange Journey, but hard nonetheless. Still with a slightly more adult cast of characters and a great story as well. Number 5. Devil Summoner Raidou Kusunoha vs. the Soulless Army and Raidou Kusunoha vs. King Abaddon. Here we have another pair of games, not quite a duology like in Digital Devil Saga, but since one is a direct sequel of the other and almost everything looks and plays the same, I decided to put them both on the same place of my top 10. Now, if you're not familiar with this game, it may surprise you to see that the gameplay I'm showing right now, since there's no turn-based press-turn system, first-person crawling or anything of the sort, it's an action RPG. And no science fiction or post-apocalyptic future. These games are set in 1931, and you play as a private detective with the help of some unusual characters, including a talking cat, to investigate crime scenes, all part of a major plot that of course involves demons. As with previous games, you can recruit demons and have them fight by your side in your party. These two games are very conceptual, very hard as well, and very fun to play. If you happen to come across them, because they're pretty rare and hard to find, don't let them escape. They're really good and underrated games. Number 4. Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse. If I did it with the previous title and also with Digital Devil Saga, you might be wondering why I didn't put this one in the same spot as Shin Megami Tensei 4. That is because even though it's half a sequel, half an alternative route from the original, and even though they look very similar gameplay-wise, I felt as if I was playing an entirely different game, much better, with now a linear story, not quest-driven anymore, with a different cast of characters. The music is still as amazing as before. The environment, now truly apocalyptic, feels the atmosphere of the game pretty well, and the gameplay itself is more entertaining than its predecessor, in my opinion. The only downfall is that the main characters are a pair of 15-year-old kids. But leaving that aside, the game feels really rewarding, more addicting, and just more fun to play. Also, I felt the story here to be more enthralling and interesting than before, so it might not be a better game to some people than the third one, but it is to me. Number 3, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, also known as Shin Megami Tensei 3 or Lucifer's Call in Europe. So of course Nocturne is definitely one of the best titles in the series, legendary and infamous at the same time for being one of the hardest JRPGs ever made. I've talked about this game a lot of times in my channel, specifically for that very same reason, but I never forget to also praise it, since it's just too damn good. The story is also one of the best in the franchise, the music, the atmosphere, the gameplay itself, not being in first person anymore, everything is excellent! I know it turned a lot of people away precisely for being excruciatingly hard, but that's pretty much the only aspect that could be called, well, negative for some people. If you're up to the challenge, however, you won't regret it one bit. It's a turn-based RPG, but it requires a lot of strategy from your behalf, and that's where the real fun is. Number 2, Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker. This is also a port for the Nintendo DS version. You know I'm a huge fan of the Devil Survivor series, and since they're two completely different games, totally unrelated, each one deserves the second and the first spot on my list. In my opinion, the second one has one of the weakest cast of characters in the entire franchise, most of them being just too stereotyped and more fan service oriented. But the story is really interesting, and the gameplay itself, being a strategy RPG once again with the press turn system, is just amazing! It's so addictive. A game with a lot of different routes where almost every single decision you make affects the story entirely. I might call these games true role-playing video games because you do feel like your actions matter, leading you into a very non-linear structure. The Nintendo DS version is tough as fuck, as hard as Nocturne, but I recommend the port to the 3DS for two reasons. It's not brutally hard anymore, still challenging, and it also has a completely new episode that takes several hours to complete, leading you to the true endings of the game. So number 1, of course, Devil Survivor Overclocked, also a port from the original Nintendo DS one. It might surprise you to know that I think there's almost an abyss between this one and the second one in terms of story, characters, and difficulty. I think the Nintendo DS version is one of the hardest and most frustrating JRPGs I've ever played in my life, harder than Nocturne. The overclocked version for the 3DS, however, stabilized that, also including a new long episode that brings everything together for its several different endings. Now, gameplay-wise, it's exactly the same game as the second one, but with a much better plot, involving the entire city of Tokyo locked up because of a mysterious incident that involves demons, as usual. Sure, there are a lot of characters that are truly annoying, but the secondary cast here feels so real, probably because they're not as stereotyped as in the second game. But enough comparisons. Devil Survivor Overclocked is definitely the best Shin Megami Tensei I've ever played, perhaps not in terms of characters and or story, but totally better in everything else. That's it, guys, that's my top 10. Those are my 10 favorite Shin Megami Tensei games, excluding the Persona ones. So don't forget to share your opinion. You're free to share your own top 10, your own order, and your own favorites. You're not going to offend anybody, and I hope I didn't offend anybody with this. That's never my intention. My intention is only to share my opinion on these sorts of matters, these top 10s. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time.